I hate identity politics. Debunked. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and it's rather odd how many people in the sphere of YouTube that was once known as atheists, then anti-SJWs or skeptics, would gladly tell you that they hate identity politics and that they think they are stupid and annoying. And then, of course, they'd go on to talk about identity politics a bunch, often creating entire channels around them. Odd, eh? I'm no exception to this, of course, and actually, Irate Bear did a fairly good job summing up my channel in a recent live stream that he had. You see, he was talking about people spurging out on the internet, whatever spurg means precisely, and he wanted me to admit that I was a spurg, which I was obviously reluctant to do because anybody can take a look at my channel and weekly live stream on the Gaytriarchy and see me not spurging basically every day. Thus, I mentioned that fact, and he said out loud what type of content I do make. And although I think he might have been subtly trying to insult me, it was a fairly accurate read of what I do on YouTube. And I'm honestly not offended by the conclusion that he came to regarding my channel summed up in a sentence. I forget the exact words that he used, but it was something to the effect of criticizing identity politics using identity politics. It was an interesting description from a fellow YouTuber that I've known for a while now, and while this does not accurately describe much of my channel, I would say that it does describe over 50% of my videos, so hats off to Bear for making that observation. More so, that observation does not offend me, not simply because it's fairly true, but because I feel that criticizing contemporary identity politics is completely necessary. Even though, if you get to know me, you'd realize that I actually wished I could live happily writing gay rom-com movies or something, sci-fi television, or maybe comic books, while getting wasted and DJing once a month on the side. Still, that didn't end up working out for me, and the main reason seems to be because entertainment has been taken over by identity politics. And since I'm not even a particularly established person in any genre of entertainment, I have to at least make a few observations about this game that I am currently choosing to largely boycott. Some might call it fighting fire with fire, and maybe that's not an entirely unfair observation. But that's not how I'd personally describe it. Rather, I'd say that I'm saying, hey guys, if you're gonna do this thing, which I think you probably shouldn't do, you could at least bother to do it correctly. And by the way, could we seriously stop doing this thing someday and focus on other things? But Prince, people already have totally stopped with the identity politics. That's so 2016. Bedroom feminist videos are an endangered species and you should get with the times. By the way, you should go on such and such a drama stream to talk about some drama you never cared about. Yeah, it'll be awesome. Okay, Mr. Faceless Twitter avatar with 25 followers. While it's darling that you'd say that with the intent of convincing me that nobody talks about identity politics anymore, anybody who takes a look at the world outside of this particular sphere of YouTube and Twitter knows that this isn't the least bit true at all, in any way whatsoever. On Facebook, for example, I still have instances where I get into a conversation about something having to do with, say, non-binary identified people ordering gay men around with pronoun demands in gay male spaces, and then all of a sudden some white guy that I knew 8 years ago shows up to tell everybody to block me on account of the fact that I'm allegedly a white supremacist. Like, we're even talking about race, and as if he had any friends that weren't white when I knew him, which he didn't. Seriously, these things still happen in the real world with people I really know in real life. These accusations about people being white supremacists who aren't racist, who never thought that they were racist, who actively speak out against things that they think are discriminatory in unfair ways in the legal system, you know, somebody like me. These accusations that people like me are somehow white supremacists are still hurled. The people hurling them are obviously projecting their own fears of deep-seated bigotry onto us. They never provide any evidence of what somebody allegedly said that was white supremacist, but it continues to not just be perpetuated, but shamelessly taught in institutions and perpetuated with leftist media. Sure, we're not necessarily dealing with bedroom feminists that are easy to pick on, but we're still dealing with this massive systemic imbalance that does actively penalize men in particular, and some would argue white men even more in particular. And even more so, we have mainstream media like Donald Glover, who I largely like, still making videos referencing the Trayvon Martin slaying, who, remember, was killed by a guy that was neither white nor a cop, and the Dylan Roof massacre of people in the South, as if those are the most relevant instances of gun violence that have happened in America this decade. Interesting that these are the things people focus on. Yes, identity politics is still, and probably will still for a while, be the primary weapon of politicians, utilized to influence the masses for electoral purposes, and I honestly did wish that I would never have to talk about this so much, in the same type of childish way that I wished I would never have to grow up. But it turns out that I do have to talk about this stuff, and by the way, I'm fairly decent at doing so. And why is that? Why am I good at talking about it? Well, for me, it's a combination of different things, from education, all of the different neighborhoods I lived in and went to school in before I turned 18, the different cities I've lived, coming out as homosexual at the age of 14 while also living in an inner city and being friends with a bunch of people who weren't necessarily like me in various different ways. Long story. But more so, if I were to say that I don't know and don't care about identity politics, I would be flat out lying. Because truthfully, we all would be. You see, we all care about identity politics when our identity is being clearly and obviously threatened. Especially when there's constant media messaging simultaneously telling us, "You're fine, you're not being threatened," or "It doesn't count when your identity is threatened anyway, even if it is being threatened." I liken it to being at a super crowded concert. People want to pretend like it doesn't bug them when they get their toes stepped on because they'd prefer to be paying attention to the music, and honestly, for the most part, they can be successful in ignoring having their toes stepped on if they like the musicians enough. However, when you're not wearing high tops or boots and you start getting pushed around and a few people with Doc Martens end up kicking your ankles on accident, you start to get annoyed. And if you've had a few drinks, you might just turn to them and say, "Hey, dude, calm the hell down!" And it might get worse from then on. You see, you didn't want to get aggressive, of course. You were just there for the music. And you also don't really care if people want to mosh. But your ankles just got kicked really hard, and it actually really hurt. So you just snap on the dude who did it, because he's acting like a maniac anyhow, and it's not like anybody is going to defend his actions for acting like a maniac. That's kind of how it is when identity politics are brought up all the time. Except, instead of it being a concert, it's now become a global thing with countless different groups that are actively persecuted by other groups, sometimes completely out in the open and by members of the group themselves. But, of course, the globe is quite crowded, like the concert. That all said, should anybody have ever acted like people would have maybe simply decided not to care? To pretend like we didn't just get kicked in the ankle? As if a developmentally challenged young man didn't get tortured on Facebook Live for being white, while people were trying to say that this wasn't an act of racism because you can't be racist against white people. People were just supposed to not care. Get real. Of course I got offended when people tried to say that being gay was a choice last decade and that I should stop drawing so much attention to myself by being openly homosexual on the internet. And now, of course, I get offended when the very organizations that once helped me argue against such bigotry now shame me for being male and tell me I'm not a good enough ally for their likings regarding issues that I don't have any reason to care about. Ugh. But hey, I'm not going to sit here and mince onions about the definition of the word ally. All I'm really saying is that you should try not to kick my ankles. Honestly, I expect you to step on my toes every once in a while, but when you end up kicking my ankles because you felt inspired to act like a maniac, don't be surprised when I write long essays about why acting like a maniac at concerts is stupid. Which I think I did, at least in my early 20s.